Hi and welcome to Matrix Moments. This is Saloni and I'm here with Avnish Bajaj, founder and managing director, Matrix Partners India. This episode is about finding and scaling your PMF and knowing what metrics to track at each stage. Avnish, how would you categorize metrics stage-wise as well as sector-wise? And would you say that there's a different set of metrics to track pre and post achieving PMF?
Hi Saloni, thank you for having me back. What in your mind is PMF?
When you hit the right fit with the market,
It's a product market fit, but what does it really mean?
PMF is basically when your consumers accept your product and it's basically consumer love.
And we could go down this path and say, what is your favorite brand? And therefore, how many times do you buy it? But it translates into a lot of those things, right? So, net, PMF is obviously product market fit, but it essentially says your product has a market. We did the CODS podcast some time ago about customer obsession, delight, satisfaction. I believe ultimately the net takeaway when you reach this stage is if my product has a market, that means it has customers, right? I have always believed, and we've spoken about in that podcast, that 10 delighted people is better than 100 happy people.
Sure.
Especially in the early stages. To your question about the stage, if I have to look at a seed stage startup, I am going to say, if I am the entrepreneur, I want to measure one thing. Are people happy or delighted? Not satisfied, we have discussed this before. Are people happy or delighted with my product? And if I had to pick, and we'll come to prioritization of metrics, I would say I want to see net promoter score and I want to see CSAT. And we have discussed this before that one is virality and one is about satisfaction, right? So, and it gets you repeat. So basically what I would focus on is, are people happy with my product and therefore will I get word of mouth? Okay. Now, and we'll talk about how different businesses, but for example, even B2B businesses, SaaS businesses, every business by definition has customers.
Right.
There is no difference. There may be nuances on how one measures in each case, but there's no difference in NPS and CSAT. It is what it is. Are my customers happy or delighted? After that, when I've reached that, where I feel, okay, I have a set of people and I'm going to get word of mouth, tongue in cheek, I'm going to say, now are people going to put their money where their mouth is, right? Are people, you can give things away free and people will be delighted, right? So the next phase, which is post the Series A phase, give or take, is with this objective. Are people going to put their money where their mouth is? Now, how do you measure that? There are multiple ways. So one of the core metrics which we have discussed before also is cohorts. But cohorts, at this stage, one needs to look beyond just usage cohorts and also look at spending cohorts. So if I have really hit delight with some customers, not only should they be buying repeatedly with me, but hopefully over a period of time, they're buying more and more, right? In the first month, they may buy once, second month, they'll buy twice, and they're spending more and more money. That is one of the earliest foundations. And again, similar metrics apply in B2B and SaaS. So one of our companies, MoEngage, I think they have some of the best SaaS metrics I've seen. And it is called the negative revenue churn, where if they do nothing, their existing customers keep spending more and more, and the business keeps growing, right? So these metrics are not just for consumer businesses, they apply everywhere. And I would call the second phase more of spending cohorts. Third phase is, so I have some customers that are delighted and are giving me word of mouth. They are putting their money where their mouth is. Do I have a business model with which I can make money doing that, right? And so at the third phase, you start looking at unit economics. How much does it cost you to acquire a customer? How much is their lifetime value? At the second phase, we would think about some level of margin, even though when we were looking at spending, we would have said, what is the gross margin of the product? What is the basic cost? So if you are selling below your cost, it's a problem. At the third stage, since you have to look at it more as a business, you have to start looking at contribution margin 1, contribution margin 2. And if all these things start firing, you will see it becomes a profitable, scalable business. So I think that's really the core of how one should think about at different phases. And we'll address some of the other points about prioritization maybe in the next question.
Sure. So, as a founder, it's always easy to spread yourself wide and try tracking all that you think is relevant for your business. But should you set a limit and then prioritize a number of metrics to track? And within this, are there specific metrics that are indicators of your company's health, like indicators for performance, growth, product improvisation, or something on these lines?
So it's a great question. I would say this is, if used incorrectly, this science can hurt you as much as it can help you. And the reason is, and I'll give you one example. I was buying on a e-commerce site. It is a company we were evaluating. And on the last page, after the payment, I think, it asked me a NPS question. How likely are you to recommend this to others? I have not received my product yet. So what are they measuring? A. B, that is not the place to ask NPS. That's the place to ask a CSAT question, to say how was your website experience?
Yeah.
Right? It's an e-commerce site. I haven't received my product. Now, by the way, it doesn't let me ignore that question. So now whatever I clicked and submitted is noise, not signal. And people may be taking actions on them. So it is extremely critical to understand which metric is relevant where. To your question on prioritization, absolutely. I would say, give or take, I can think of maybe 5 metrics or 6 metrics that can define any company. NPS, CSAT, gross margin, contribution margin, and ultimately it will come down to EBITDA. Now there's return on capital. So yes, less is more. Think very, very carefully about, if I could measure only one thing, maybe too little, but 2 or 3 things, what are most important? Otherwise you can get buried. Number 1. Number 2, how and where you measure, which example we just discussed, is almost more important than what you measure, because you may end up otherwise making wrong decisions. Number 3, people can tend to get buried, again to your question on measuring too many things, measuring them at various deep stages. So thinking of it top down to say, what is the architecture of my business? If I'm an e-commerce site, this is the architecture. If I'm a SaaS site, this is the architecture of my business. And in each piece of that architecture, at the top line level, at the middle line level, at the bottom line level, can I pick 1 or 2 metrics? And at the operating metrics level, which give me a sense of the health of the business. Finally, very important, I think most companies that measure statistics themselves likely err on the side of being more positive than the reality. And so I am a big believer, and I have often advised founders that always have third parties, do outside in surveys, mystery shopping, and even NPS scores. For example, I have seen gaps of 20 points between what a company reports and then if a third party diligence is done or a third party survey is carried out, what is reported. So where you are measuring, who you are measuring with, if you are measuring with your own customers, how do you know who has lapsed out and because they weren't happy, and how are you measuring then the real satisfaction? Which is why companies' own surveys tend to be always overstated, because the people who are really unhappy and who went away are no longer in your measurement set by definition. So I think that's critical. So like I said, best thing to do, measure fewer things, make sure you're measuring them at the right place and at the right time, and third, triangulate with a lot of outside-in data.
Got it. Thanks, Avnish. Thank you for listening, and you can find the transcribed version of this podcast on matrixpartners.in. You can also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn for more updates.